When my body began to bloom, my father and brother decided they had the right to my harvest. "We're going to use your," he said coldly. For years, I had to divide myself between the body they took and the mind I protected like a hidden treasure. Hello, my dear friends. What a joy to have you here with me today. I'm Virginia Brooks, 73 years young, and I'm coming to you from my little home in Asheville, North Carolina. I was born in a small mining town in West Virginia, but life brought me to this colorful mountain region where I found my peace. Today, I spend my days creating miniature American houses inside glass bottles. Can you believe that? I have a collection of over 50 bottles, each with a different structure. There's a New England fisherman's cottage, a Louisiana bayou house on stilts, a colonial home from Virginia, even a small Pike Place market I made as a tribute to Seattle. I use fine tweezers, toothpicks, and lots of patience. People always ask how I managed to fit those detailed little houses through such narrow bottlenecks. I started this curious craft about 15 years ago when I retired from the university. I worked as an American literature professor for over 30 years, surrounded by books, which have always been my greatest friends and teachers. It was a gentleman who visited the university library in Portland, Mr. Norman, who taught me the art of miniatures and bottles. He had learned it from a sailor from Cape Cod and spent hours showing me how to fold small pieces of balsa wood and fit them together with precision. I'm sitting here in my craft room where I spend my afternoons. I have a workbench full of tiny tools that my son-in-law, Jerry, helped me set up. From my window, I can see the street, children playing, life passing by. At night, after hours hunched over my microscopic creations, I drink my chamomile tea and rest my eyes reading a bit before bed. Books continue to be my other great passion. Oh, and before I continue my story, I'd like to make a special request to those watching. Tell me in the comments, which town or city are you watching from? And what time of day did you find this video? Morning with your coffee, after lunch, or already in the evening? I always read all the comments, and I'm so happy to know where you're from and when you take time out of your day to listen to this grandma's stories. Let me know, okay? Let's create a chain of kindness. You know, my life wasn't always this magical miniature world I build today. There was a time when I lived trapped in a much larger bottle, unable to see a way out. A time when I learned that sometimes, to survive, we need to make ourselves small, tiny even, but never lose hope of finding a way out. Today, I want to tell you how a frightened girl found in words and books the strength to build, piece by piece, a new life. It's a difficult story, but it's also a story of hope. Because, as I learned with my miniatures, even in the tightest spaces, it's possible to create a whole world of possibilities. I was born in Coleridge, a land of coal mines, but our life had nothing bright about it. Our house was on a dirt road on the outskirts of town. It was a simple house, with wooden boards and a tin roof, with 3 small rooms, the living room that also served as a kitchen, my parents' bedroom, and the bedroom I shared with my brother Arthur. My father, Conrad Brooks, worked in the coal mine, coming and going with his hands always hurt and a temperament harder than the coal he dug. My mother, Emily, took in laundry and had fingers always wrinkled from scrubbing clothes in the cement basin. When I was little, around 6 or 7, there were still moments of joy. I remember playing jacks with the stones I found in the yard, chasing little lizards that hid in the cracks of the wall, listening to the old radio my father turned on Sunday afternoons. Emily, I always called my mother by her name, a habit she herself taught me, made cornbread with honey that was finger-licking good. On special days, there would be a farm chicken on the plate, raised in our backyard. My brother Arthur was 8 years older than me. From early on, he became my father's shadow, mimicking his gestures, his way of talking, even the way he spat to the side when he was thinking. The two would leave early for the mine lands and return when the sun had already hidden behind the hills. I remember Arthur sometimes bringing me colored stones he found, saying they were diamonds, but I knew they weren't. Still, I kept them lovingly in a candy tin that I hid under my mattress. At school, I was the quiet type who sat at the back of the room. Teacher Delilah always said I had a special way with letters. "Girl, your handwriting is so beautiful, it looks like lace on a pillow," she would say. And it was true. I took care with my notebooks, drawing the letters as if I were embroidering the paper. The books in the school library were few, but I read and reread each one, even the most difficult ones. My greatest joy was when the teacher let me take a book home over the weekend. Friends were few. There was Josie, the daughter of neighbor Mrs. Grace, who lived 3 houses down from ours. We played with dolls made from corn husks, with kitchen games using old pots our mothers no longer used. Sometimes we went together to the small creek that ran behind the houses, where we washed our feet in the cool water and made up stories about mermaids and water monsters. My father didn't like me wandering around, as he said. "Girls have to learn housework," was what he always said when he saw me playing. From the age of 8, I was already helping Emily wring out clothes, sweep the dirt floor of the house, peel potatoes for lunch. My small hands already knew the weight of the water buckets I carried from the spout to our house. Religion was an important part of our lives. Every Sunday, we wore our least worn clothes and went to Mass at St. Anthony's Church. I liked to look at the colored stained glass, smell the incense, hear the songs that echoed on the ancient walls. My father and brother were serious, heads bowed. My mother prayed quietly, moving her lips in silent prayers that I didn't understand, but that seemed to come from a very deep place within her. It was around this time, when I was about 9, that I began to notice something strange at home. There were days when Emily dawned with red eyes, as if she had cried all night. My father and Arthur exchanged glances that I didn't understand, whispered when they thought I wasn't paying attention. Sometimes, I heard my mother sobbing quietly in the bedroom and my father saying in a harsh tone, "There's no way, woman. Things are the way they are." I remember once I entered the kitchen and the 3 of them were talking. When they saw me, they suddenly fell silent, as if I had interrupted an important secret. My father looked at me differently, evaluating, and said, "She's becoming a young lady, this girl." I didn't understand what he meant, but I felt a strange shiver run down my spine. Arthur smiled sideways, a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and Emily just lowered her head, as if she couldn't face me. At school, Teacher Delilah began lending me different books, stories of girls who faced difficulties, who had to be strong. "For life, girl, not just for books," she would say, with a look that seemed to see beyond what I showed. It was she who taught me that words could be a refuge, a place where I could hide when the world outside became too heavy. On my 11th birthday, Emily made a cornbread with blueberry jam. There was no candle, no present, but it was the first time I had a cake all my own. When we were eating, my father looked at me and said, "Enjoy, girl. Next year will be different." I didn't understand what he meant, but I kept those words. Today I know it was a warning, a sentence he had already decided for me. At 12, I began to notice the first changes in my body. Breasts beginning to appear, new hairs, a strange feeling inside me, as if my own body was preparing me for something I didn't yet understand. Emily noticed, of course. One afternoon, she called me to help hang clothes on the line, and as we worked side by side, she said quietly, as if afraid of being heard, "When nature knocks on your door, tell me. And be strong, my daughter, stronger than I managed to be." Those words kept hammering in my head. What nature was this that would knock on my door? Why would I need to be strong? What had my mother not managed to be? Questions that would remain unanswered for a time, until nature, as she called it, finally arrived, forever changing the course of my story. It was on a March morning. I had just turned 13. I woke up with a strange pain in my stomach and a wet feeling between my legs. When I looked, I saw a red stain on the raw cotton sheet. My heart raced, not with fear, but with a sudden understanding. This was what Emily called nature knocking on the door. I got up slowly so as not to wake Arthur, who was still sleeping in the other corner of the room. I took a piece of clean cloth from the laundry basket and headed to the basin in the back of the house. With trembling hands, I washed myself as best I could and wrapped the cloth between my legs, as I had seen my mother do on her days. Emily was in the kitchen, stirring the cornmeal in the wood stove. I got close to her and whispered, "Mom, I think nature knocked on my door today." She stopped stirring the cornmeal, stood motionless for a few seconds, as if she had turned to stone. When she turned to me, I saw something in her eyes that I had never seen before, a deep fear mixed with infinite sadness. "Come here, daughter," she said, taking me behind the house where no one could hear us. She hugged me in a desperate way, as if it were the last time. I felt her tears wetting my hair as she whispered, "Now you need to be strong, stronger than I was." She explained to me how to use the cloths, how to wash them without anyone seeing, how to hide it from the men of the house. "Don't say anything to your father or Arthur, you hear? Say you have a stomachache if they ask anything." The desperation in her voice scared me more than the blood. But that same night, as I helped Emily wash the dinner dishes, I noticed she had red eyes. She had cried all afternoon. When we finished, she went to talk to my father on the porch. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but her gestures were pleading. My father just shook his head firmly. At one point, he grabbed her arm forcefully and said something that made her turn pale. Shortly after, my father came in and called me. "Come here, girl. We need to talk. You and Arthur come with me to the living room." His voice allowed no refusal. I looked at my mother, who just lowered her head, defeated. In the living room, dimly lit by the kerosene lamp, my father made me sit on the wooden bench. Arthur was leaning against the wall, with a strange smile on his lips. Conrad sat in front of me, eyes fixed on mine. "Your mother told me you became a woman today," he said, his voice low and controlled. "In our family, we have a tradition. When a girl blooms, she needs to understand her role. You now have a duty to the family that raised and fed you all these years." I remained silent, not really understanding what he meant. My father continued, "Your brother and I are the men of the house. We're the ones who work hard to bring food to the table. And now that you have your flower, we will be its guardians. We'll make sure it blooms the right way." I felt a chill in my stomach. His words didn't make complete sense to me, but there was something in them that terrified me. Arthur took a step forward and said, "It's an honor for you, little sister. Not all girls have two men to take care of them." My father then leaned in closer and said almost in a whisper, "From today on, we will use your flower. It's our responsibility, understand? That's how things work in our family. It was like this with your mother too, until you were born." I wanted to ask, wanted to understand exactly what they meant, but the words were stuck in my throat. Something inside me already knew, even if my girl's mind didn't yet fully comprehend. I looked through the kitchen door and saw my mother with her back turned, shoulders drooping, as if carrying the weight of the world. "Don't be afraid," my father said, in a tone that was meant to be gentle, but that sounded as cold as the coal he mined. "Just let us take care of you. It's our right. And you won't tell anyone, because this is family business. If you tell, no one will believe a girl like you, and they'll take you to the orphanage, away from your mother." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay looking at the cracks in the roof, counting the stars I could see through them. Arthur slept in the other corner of the room, his light snoring filling the silence. I was terrified at the idea of closing my eyes. In my head, my father's words repeated like a nightmare. "We will use your flower." 2 days passed. 2 days when I lived in suspension, waiting for something terrible that I didn't completely understand. My mother could barely look at me, as if she were ashamed. When we found ourselves alone, she would just squeeze my hand and say, "Be strong, my daughter." On the third night after that conversation, I woke up to the creaking of the bedroom door. Moonlight came through the small window, partially illuminating the room. My father's silhouette was cut against the faint light. I pretended I was still asleep, my heart beating so hard I thought he might hear it. He approached my mattress, crouched down beside me. The smell of whiskey and sweat invaded my nostrils. "It's time to take care of your flower, girl," he whispered, his rough hand touching my arm. At that moment, something inside me split into two parts. One part was the frightened girl lying on that mattress, feeling the touch of the man who should be protecting her. The other part rose to the ceiling, to the stars that shone beyond the tiles, and stayed there, watching everything from a distance, as if it wasn't happening to me. That's how I discovered my first escape, separating mind from body. While my father did what he thought he had a right to, my thoughts were far away, in the stories from the books that Teacher Delilah lent me. I imagined myself as the protagonist of Little Women, living in New England, playing in gardens far from that house in Coleridge. The next morning, Emily immediately noticed that something had changed. She saw in my eyes that same emptiness she carried in hers. As we washed clothes together, she cried quietly, "Forgive me, daughter. Forgive me for not being able to protect you." I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. Instead, I asked, "Did you go through this too?" She just nodded, without words. Then I understood that tradition hadn't begun with me. My mother had also been a girl like me, trapped in a web she couldn't break. The following week, I returned to school after a few days away. Teacher Delilah immediately noticed something different about me. During the break, she called me to the empty classroom. "What happened, Virginia? You're different," she said, with that intuition that only good teachers have. I opened my mouth to speak, but my father's words echoed in my mind. "If you tell, no one will believe, and they'll take you to the orphanage." Fear made me swallow the truth. "Nothing, teacher. I'm just tired." She didn't insist, but handed me a new book. "I brought this for you. It's the story of a girl who finds strength in unexpected places." It was The Secret Garden. That book would become my true secret garden in the following months. At home, nights became a nightmare. Sometimes it was my father, sometimes Arthur. They never came together, but they knew about each other. It was as if they had some silent agreement about who would take care of my flower each night. Emily sank deeper into her silence, unable to confront the men of the house, trapped in her own story of submission. I developed a routine to survive. During the day, I was the Virginia everyone knew, quiet, studious, helping with household chores. But inside, I increasingly hid in books, in stories, in words that took me far from that reality. I began to focus on a point on the wall when they came at night. I fixed my gaze on a specific stain on the plaster and transported myself into the books I read. My performance at school began to attract even more attention. It was as if my mind, needing to escape reality, clung to studies as a lifeline. My essays especially impressed Teacher Delilah. "You have a gift with words," she would say. "You write as if you've already lived many lives." She didn't know that, in a way, I really did live many lives. Those of the books I devoured and the one I was forced to live at home, divided between the body that stayed and the mind that fled. It was around this time, about 6 months after the beginning of my torment, that Teacher Delilah made me an invitation that would change everything. "I'm starting a reading and writing group after school twice a week. I'd like you to participate." My heart tightened. More time away from home meant more time free from the nightly visits, more time in the world of books and words. But it also meant facing my father's anger, who didn't like me wandering around after school. "I need to ask permission at home, teacher," I replied, already knowing what the answer would be. And as I imagined, my father immediately denied it. "School is already plenty during the day. In the afternoon you help your mother at home." But something was changing inside me. A small seed of rebellion, planted by the books I read, was beginning to germinate. One afternoon, I found the courage and lied. I said the teacher had asked me to stay and help organize the books in the library. In reality, I went to the reading group. Those 2 hours were like breathing fresh air after suffocating for a long time. We were 5 students, sitting in a circle, reading excerpts from books and discussing what we felt. When it was my turn to read, my hands were shaking, but my voice came out firm, as if someone else was speaking through me. After the reading, the teacher gave us new notebooks. These are your diaries. Write in them what you can't say out loud. Keep them in a safe place where only you can find them. That notebook would become my true confidant, the only place where I could be completely honest about what was happening at home. I hid it in a hole I dug under a loose board in the floor where neither Arthur nor my father would ever find it. In the months that followed, my life became a strange division between 2 worlds. At home, I was the silent girl who accepted her fate, who let herself be used as if her body didn't belong to her. At school and in the reading group, I was another person, someone with a voice, with ideas, with dreams that dared to go beyond the wooden walls of our house in Coleridge. The diary that teacher Delilah had given me became my true home. There I could be honest, could cry, could scream through words what my voice couldn't say. I wrote by the light of thin candles that I managed to save from the remnants of those we used at home, always late at night, after everyone was asleep. Sometimes tears stained the paper, blurring the ink of the pen I had received from the teacher. One night I wrote, "Do all girls live like this? Is every daughter used as an object by her own father and brother? Or is it just me, who was born with some invisible mark that tells men they can do this to me?" The nights in our house followed a pattern that I began to decipher. When my father came home from the mine and drank more than usual, I knew he would come to the room. When Arthur watched me during dinner with that specific look, I knew it would be him. I learned to read these signs, not to avoid, for there was no way, but to prepare myself mentally, to have time to build the walls that separated my mind from my body. Emily, my mother, withered each day. Her eyes lost their shine, her hands became more trembling. Once, I found her behind the house, sobbing with her face in her hands. When she saw me, she tried to disguise it, but I sat down beside her, took her hands in mine. "You try, don't you?" I asked quietly. "Try to protect me?" She nodded, tears running down her prematurely aged face. "Every blessed day, daughter. But he says if I open my mouth, he'll kill us both and still boast at the sheriff's office because they're all his friends there. And Sheriff Jeremiah is just like him, does the same with his daughter." It was the first time I understood that our case wasn't unique. There were other girls, other helpless mothers, other fathers and brothers who believed they had a right over the bodies of the women in the family. It was an invisible web that covered our town, perhaps the entire country, a web made of silence and fear. When I turned 14, my father decided I no longer needed to attend school. "You already know how to read and write, what more?" he said, pounding his fist on the table during dinner. "Now you need to learn to be a real woman, take care of the house. Soon you'll have to find a husband." The idea of leaving school, of losing my only refuge, my contact with teacher Delilah and with books, was like a death sentence. For the first time, I contested. "But I want to continue studying," I said, my voice almost a whisper. The reaction was immediate. My father stood up, knocking over the chair. With a quick movement, he grabbed my arm with such force that it left purple marks. "You don't want anything," he growled, his face so close to mine that I could smell the sour odor of his breath. "You do what I tell you." That night, the visit was especially brutal. He made a point of reminding me who was in charge, who decided, who owned my life. The next morning, I could hardly walk properly, but I had to help Emily wash clothes as if nothing had happened. For 3 days, I stayed at home, obedient, pretending to accept my fate. But on the 4th day, when my father and Arthur left for the mine, I put on my only good dress and went to the school. Not to attend classes, I knew they wouldn't let me in, but to talk to teacher Delilah. I waited outside until the end of classes. When the other students left, I entered and found her organizing papers in the empty classroom. "Virginia," she exclaimed, surprised. "I thought you had given up on school. It's been 3 days since you've been here." "My father doesn't want me to study anymore," I replied, trying to control the tears. "He says I already know enough and that I need to stay at home." She looked at me with those eyes that seemed to see through people. She came closer, noticed the marks on my arm that my dress couldn't completely hide. "What happens in your home, Virginia?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. I felt a lump in my throat. I wanted to tell everything, pour out that terrible secret, ask for help. But my father's words echoed. "If you tell, no one will believe, and they'll take you to the orphanage." And now, added to that, the fear for my mother's life, whom he had threatened to kill. "Nothing, teacher," I lied, lowering my eyes. "Just that my father thinks girls don't need to study much." She didn't believe me, I knew. But she also didn't insist. Instead, she opened a drawer and took out 3 books and a new notebook. "Take these," she said, placing them in my hands. "If you can't come to school, the school will come to you. And keep writing. Words have power, Virginia. More power than you imagine." I hid the books under my dress and ran back home, afraid that my father or Arthur would come back earlier and discover my outing. Luckily, I arrived before them and managed to hide the treasure with my diary under the loose board. One of the books was Jane Eyre, the story of an orphan who faces numerous difficulties but maintains her dignity and independence. I read that book 7 times in the following months, almost memorized it. Jane's courage, her determination not to submit, even when there seemed to be no way out, fed something inside me that refused to die. Isolation was their strategy to break me completely. Without school, without contact with people other than Emily, who spoke little, consumed by her own pain, I was at the total mercy of those men. Arthur now stayed at home more, watching me, making sure I didn't leave. I began to understand that I wasn't just an object of pleasure for them. I was property, something they believed they owned. One afternoon, as I washed the lunch dishes, Arthur approached from behind, pressing himself against me. I tried to move away, but he held me by the hair. "Have you heard of the Morgans?" he asked, referring to a family that lived on the other side of town. "Their oldest son is looking for a wife. Dad talked to our father yesterday at the mine." I felt a chill. "And what does that have to do with me?" He laughed, a dry and cruel sound. "Dad's going to sell you to them, little sister. Says we've used your flour enough. Now it's time to profit from it. They'll give 2 heads of cattle and a piece of land near the river." The shock was so great that I dropped the plate I was washing. The dishes shattered on the floor, just like my last hope. Being sold as a wife to a stranger meant I would never see Teacher Delilah again, never have a chance to escape. That night, lying on the mattress, I heard my parents talking in the kitchen. My father confirmed what Arthur had said. He was negotiating my marriage with the Morgans. Emily cried softly, pleading, "She's just a girl still, Conrad. She's only 14. "That's old enough," he replied. "And it's not like she's pure. She's already well trained to be a wife." Those words hit me like a punch. Well trained, as if I were an animal. That's when I realized that if I didn't do something, my entire life would be decided by others. My body would always be someone's property. I thought about running away, simply running off in the middle of the night. But where to? Without money, without knowing anyone beyond Coleridge, how would I survive? And there was the constant threat. If I ran away, my father would come after me and would make Emily pay for my disappearance. For a few weeks, I lived in a state of growing despair. The marriage was being arranged. I heard my father talking about it every night. The Morgans would come to meet me soon. I would be taken to another house where the cycle of abuse would continue, just with different men. During this time, writing in the diary became even more desperate. They were no longer just accounts of what happened, but cries for help on paper, pleas directed at no one. The only small light was that, with the marriage approaching, my father and Arthur left me a bit in peace during the nights. "We have to deliver the merchandise in good condition," I heard my father tell Arthur once, laughing as if he were telling a joke. It was during this brief respite that I managed, by pure luck, an encounter that would change everything. One afternoon, I was sent to the small-town store to buy salt and kerosene. It was the first time in weeks that I was allowed to go out alone, perhaps because the store was owned by my father's cousin, Nate, who would certainly watch me. On the way, I literally bumped into Teacher Delilah, who was coming from the opposite direction, carrying some books. Upon seeing me, her face lit up, but soon darkened when she noticed my appearance. I was thinner, pale, with deep, dark circles. "My God, girl, what have they done to you?" she asked, holding my shoulders. The tears came without me being able to control them. I couldn't say anything, just cry, there in the middle of the street, while she hugged me. "Come with me," she said, pulling me into the alley between two houses. "Tell me what's happening, and this time, I want the truth." The truth. How to explain that horrible truth? How to put into words what I could barely bear to think about? But something in her expression, in the firmness of her voice, broke my last defenses. "My father and my brother," I began, my voice trembling, "they use me. Since I became a woman. They say it's a family tradition, that they have a right, and now they're going to sell me as a wife to the Morgans." I expected to see shock, disbelief, even disgust on her face. But what I saw was a painful understanding, as if she already suspected something like this. "It's not the first time I've heard this story in Coleridge," she said, her voice low. "Nor will it be the last, unfortunately. But you, Virginia, you have something that many of these girls don't have." "What?" I asked, not understanding. "Your gift with words, your intelligence." She squeezed my hands. "And you have me. I'll help you, but we need to be very careful." For the first time in many months, I felt something like hope. After that meeting with Teacher Delilah in the alley, I returned home with my heart divided between fear and a timid hope. She made me promise that we would meet again in 3 days, at the same time, near Nate's store. "I'll think of something," she assured me. "Meanwhile, keep writing. Write everything, every detail, every feeling." At home, things were getting worse each day. The Morgans had scheduled a visit for the following Sunday. They wanted to examine the merchandise, as my father said without any shame. Arthur was nervous, irritated with the idea of losing his right over me. One night, I heard him arguing with my father on the porch. "Why sell her now?" Arthur complained. "We can wait another year at least." "Shut up, boy," my father replied. "The Morgans are offering 2 heads of cattle and that piece of land near the river. It's a good deal, and we need the money." "And my right?" Arthur insisted. "It's not fair." He was interrupted by the sound of a slap. "You're right. Who runs this house is me. You do what I say, understand?" The realization hit me like lightning. They weren't as united as I thought. There was tension, there were gaps in that perverse alliance. I kept that information, sensing it could be useful. The next day, as I washed clothes in the basin out back, Emily approached, looking nervously around to make sure we were alone. "Daughter," she whispered, "I found this under the loose board. I thought it was yours." In her trembling hands was my diary. I froze. If my father or Arthur had found those pages where I described everything that happened, the consequences would be terrible. But it had been Emily, and her look wasn't one of censure, but of a deep sadness mixed with something I had never seen before in her. Determination. "I read it," she confessed. "Read everything. I didn't know you wrote so well, daughter. Nor did I know you kept so much pain inside you." I couldn't answer. I just took the diary from her hands, ready to hide it again. "Wait," she said, holding my arm. "I won't let them sell you to the Morgans. I've allowed too many things already. I won't let what happened to me happen to you." "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice almost vanishing. Her eyes filled with tears. "My father sold me to your father when I was 15. I was merchandise just like you, and I stayed quiet all these years, dying a little each day." She squeezed my hand tightly. "But not you. You're going to get out of here." That same night, the worst happened. Arthur, outraged with the idea of losing me to the Morgans, decided to take advantage one last time of what he considered his right. My father had gone out to drink at Seraphim's bar, and Emily was already asleep, or at least pretending to be. When I heard the bedroom door creak, I knew it was him. Unlike other times, I didn't let myself dissociate completely. Something from the conversation with teacher Delilah, something from my mother's sudden determination, gave me courage to stay present, to face reality head on. Arthur approached my mattress, already unbuttoning his pants. The smell of whiskey was strong. He had been drinking too, perhaps to work up courage. "Little sister," he whispered, "one last time before you become a Morgan woman." For the first time, I reacted. "No," I said, my voice firmer than it had ever been. "Don't touch me." He seemed shocked for a moment, then laughed softly. "Now you're playing hard to get? It won't work. You know you have no choice." He tried to grab me, but I dodged, getting up from the mattress. "I do have a choice," I said, my heart beating so hard I thought he could hear it. "I can scream so loud that everyone on the street will hear. I can tell everyone what you and Dad do to me." His face contorted with anger. "No one will believe you. And if you try, I'll beat you until you can't speak anymore." "Then beat me," I challenged, a strength I didn't know I had taking over me. "Beat me and leave marks for everyone to see tomorrow. The Morgans will like buying a bride all bruised." It was the mention of the Morgans that made him hesitate. He knew my father would be furious if anything interfered with the deal. I took advantage of his hesitation to continue. "And there's more," I added. "I wrote everything down. Every night. Everything you did to me. It's all recorded, hidden in a place you'll never find. If anything happens to me, other people will find that diary." It was a partial bluff. The diary existed, but its hiding place had been discovered by Emily. Still, the doubt in Arthur's look showed that my words had an effect. He retreated, confused, anger still evident, but now mixed with fear. "You're lying," he said, but without the same conviction as before. "Try and see," I replied, holding his gaze. For a tense moment, we stood there, standing, staring at each other in the dim room. Then, cursing under his breath, he turned and left, slamming the door behind him. I collapsed on the mattress, trembling from head to toe, hardly believing what I had just done. I had confronted Arthur, had resisted for the first time. It hadn't been a great victory. He would return, certainly, when he was less drunk, less confused. But something fundamental had changed inside me. I was no longer just a passive victim. The next morning, Arthur avoided looking at me during breakfast. My father, unaware of what had happened, spoke animatedly about the Morgans' visit on Sunday. Emily watched me with a different look, as if she were seeing me for the first time. When the day came to meet teacher Delilah, I made up an excuse to go out. I said I needed to gather firewood in the woods. It was a task I normally did, so it didn't raise immediate suspicions, although Arthur gave me a suspicious look. The teacher was already waiting for me at the agreed place, carrying a cloth bag. Her face lit up when she saw me. "Virginia," she said, hugging me quickly. "Let's go to a more private place." We went to the small abandoned chapel on the outskirts of town, where no one would see or hear us. There, seated on the worn stone steps, she took some papers from her bag. "I found a way for you," she said, handing me the papers. "It's an essay contest sponsored by the state government. The winner gets a full scholarship to the Sacred Heart boarding school in Richmond. This is your path to escape." I took the papers with trembling hands. A boarding school in Richmond meant distance, meant freedom from my tormentors, meant a real chance to escape. "But how?" I began, my voice failing. How will I participate? My father won't let me. The teacher smiled, determined. You don't need his permission to write an essay. I'll send it to the contest myself, and you, Virginia, have the gift of writing. I've read your texts, read your diary. You write like few people I've known. And if I win? I asked, a thread of hope beginning to strengthen inside me. My father will never let me go. That's where the second part of the plan comes in, she explained. If you win, the school will send an official letter to your father. It's a prestigious award with a ceremony in Richmond, newspaper coverage. Could your father refuse, with the whole town knowing, with the chance to brag that his daughter is an award-winning writer? I began to understand the plan. It was risky, it depended on many factors, but it was the best chance I had. And there's more, continued the teacher. I talked to my sister in Richmond. If everything goes well and you win, she can take you in during the holidays. You'll never have to return to this house. At that moment, looking at the contest papers in my hands, I saw a possible future for the first time. A future where I wasn't an object, a commodity, but a person with my own value, with the right to dream. What's the essay topic? I asked, already thinking about what I would write. The power of words to transform realities, replied the teacher with a smile. It seems it was made for you, doesn't it? I agreed, feeling a determination grow inside me. I'll write something no one has ever read before. We spent more time discussing the details of the plan. I would write the essay in secret, using the material the teacher gave me. I would have to deliver it to her in a week, so there would be time to send it before the final deadline. If I won, the notification would arrive approximately 2 weeks later, well before the planned date for my marriage to the Morgans. I returned home with my heart lighter than it had been in months, the contest papers hidden inside my clothes. That night, after everyone was asleep, I lit a candle stub and began to write. The story that emerged wasn't explicitly mine. It would be too dangerous. Instead, I created a narrative about a girl who lived trapped in an invisible cage, whose song was silenced by those who should protect her. I wrote about how she found in written words the wings she needed to fly far away from that cage. It was a metaphor, but any sensitive person would understand the underlying truth. I worked on that essay for 5 straight nights, rewriting, improving each word, each phrase. I put in those pages all my pain, all my hope, all my determination not to let those men define who I was or what I could become. On the 6th night, as I wrote the final version, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Quickly, I blew out the candle and hid the papers under the mattress. The door opened slowly, and my father's silhouette was cut against the faint light coming from the kitchen. "What are you doing awake at this hour?" he asked, his voice slurred by drink. "Nothing, Dad," I replied, my heart racing. I just couldn't sleep. He entered the room, staggering slightly. He sat on the edge of my mattress, his weight making the paper hidden beneath me rustle slightly. "The Morgans are coming to meet you Sunday," he said. "You're going to behave, understood? You're going to show that you're a good girl, obedient. They're paying good money for you." Something inside me broke at that moment. It wasn't fear, it wasn't sadness. It was the last drop of respect or consideration I might still have for that man who was my father only biologically. "Yes, Dad," I replied, keeping my face neutral. "I'll behave." He got up, apparently satisfied, and staggered out of the room. As soon as the door closed, I let the tears run silently. They weren't tears of despair, but of a cold and determined anger. That would be the last time he would treat me as merchandise. The last time I would feel powerless before him. The next morning, I found Emily alone in the kitchen. Without saying a word, I handed her the essay papers, already folded and ready to be delivered to Teacher Delilah. "It's important, Mom," I whispered. "It's my chance to get out of here. Can you deliver it to Teacher Delilah at the school? Please." She took the papers with trembling hands, quickly hiding them in her apron pocket. "I'll deliver it, daughter. And may God help you win whatever this is." A week passed. The Morgans came on Sunday, as planned. The patriarch, a bald, pot-bellied man named Theodore, looked me up and down as if evaluating an animal at the market. His son, Buford, a young man in his early 20s with the same predatory look as my father, smiled in a way that gave me chills. I kept my eyes lowered, pretending submission, while inside I repeated like a mantra, "This will end. This will end." They were satisfied with what they saw. They settled the final details with my father. The marriage would take place in a month. I would have to go live on their farm, about 6 miles from town. Far from any possibility of help, far from teacher Delilah, far from any hope, or so they thought. In the week following the meeting with the Morgans, I lived in a state of suspension, divided between the fear that my plan would fail and the desperate hope that it would work. Each time I heard someone approach the house, my heart raced, imagining it could be news of the contest. During this period, the nightly visits from my father and Arthur decreased. They really wanted to deliver the merchandise in good condition. That was the only mercy in those tense days of waiting. Then, on a rainy Tuesday, it happened. I was helping Emily prepare lunch when we heard knocks on the door. It was the mailman, Mr. Jessup, carrying an official envelope addressed to my father. "It's from the state government," he said importantly. "Need to sign here." Emily signed, since my father and Arthur were at the mine. As soon as the mailman left, she handed me the envelope, her eyes shining with expectation. "I think it's what you've been waiting for, daughter." With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. Inside, a letter stamped with the seal of the state of Virginia. "We are pleased to inform you that your daughter, Virginia Brooks, is the winner of the state essay contest, youth category. The prize consists of a full scholarship to Sacred Heart Boarding School in Richmond, including lodging, meals, and school supplies for 3 years. We request the presence of the student and a guardian for the award ceremony." I couldn't finish reading. Tears blurred my vision, and a sob of relief escaped my throat. I had done it. I had found my way out. Emily read the letter over my shoulder, bringing her hands to her mouth in astonishment. "My God in heaven," she murmured. "You did it, daughter. You did it." We hugged, crying together, a rare moment of hope in that house that had only known sadness. "And now?" she asked, worried. "Your father will never let—" "He will," I replied, determined. Teacher Delilah explained. "It's an important award. It will be in the newspapers. His pride won't let him refuse. And besides—" I hesitated, realizing the truth as I spoke. "Besides, if he refuses a government award, people will ask questions. They'll want to know why a father would prevent his daughter from studying for free at a good school." Understanding shone in her eyes. My father could be cruel, could be perverse, but he wasn't stupid. He knew certain appearances needed to be maintained. When he came home from the mine in the late afternoon, the letter was on the table. I saw his face go from confusion to anger, then to a cold calculation, and finally to a kind of distorted pride. "How did this happen?" he asked, waving the letter in my direction. "Teacher Delilah entered the best students from the school," I lied, the story we had agreed upon. "I didn't even know. I only found out now, with the letter." He looked at me suspiciously, but the pride of being able to boast around town that his daughter had won a state award was already taking over him. I could see the thoughts passing behind his eyes, how this would make him seem important, how he could use this to his advantage. "And the Morgans?" asked Arthur, who had heard everything from the kitchen door. "The deal is already made." My father was silent for a moment, thinking. Then he shrugged. "They can wait. Or find another girl. A government scholarship isn't something you throw away." At that moment, I realized I had won the first battle, but the war wasn't won yet. I needed to get to Richmond. I needed to ensure I would never return to that house. The week that followed the receipt of the letter was a whirlwind of emotions and preparations. My father, moved by a mixture of pride and interest in the benefits that award could bring, accepted that I would go to Richmond. The Morgans were informed that the agreement was temporarily suspended, not cancelled, as my father made sure to clarify. After she finishes her studies, she comes back here and the marriage happens, he told Theodore Morgan, who wasn't at all pleased. Teacher Delilah came to our house to explain all the details of the award. My father received her in the living room, making a point of appearing to be the proud father of the talented daughter, a farce that made me nauseous, but that I knew was necessary for my plan to work. The ceremony will be at the Department of Education in Richmond, explained Delilah. Government representatives and the press will be present. It's an immense honor for Coleridge to have an award-winning student. My father swelled with importance at each word, imagining how he would be seen by others in town. That fed his vanity, making him more malleable. "And how long does this study last?" he asked, his calculating eyes. 3 years, replied the teacher, with the possibility of extension if the performance is exceptional. I saw his face close for a moment, but soon adjusted again to the mask of the exemplary father. "Well, knowledge is never too much," he said, in a falsity that only those who knew him well could detect. When the teacher said goodbye, she squeezed my hand firmly, discreetly passing me a note. Later, reading it hidden in the yard, I found detailed instructions. "Take only the essentials. My sister Margaret will be at the ceremony and will take you to her house afterwards. Have courage." Emily helped me prepare the small bundle with my few clothes. Her eyes were full of tears, a mixture of joy for my chance to escape and sadness for our imminent separation. "Come with me, Mom," I pleaded in a whisper as we folded an old skirt. "You don't have to stay here with them." She shook her head, resigned. "My time has passed, daughter. I don't have the strength to start over anymore. But you have your whole life ahead of you. And you have what I never had, the gift of words." I wanted to insist, but something in her look told me it would be useless. Emily had accepted her fate a long time ago. Her small rebellion had been to help me escape, and that already required more courage than she believed she possessed. "I'll write to you," I promised. "And one day, when I can, I'll come get you." She smiled, a sad smile that said more than words could express. "Just knowing that you are free and happy is enough for me, daughter." On the eve of the trip, I went to meet Teacher Delilah one last time. We met at the same abandoned chapel, now a symbol of the transition I was about to live, from the ruins of my stolen childhood to the construction of a future that I myself would write. "I'm afraid," I confessed, sitting on the stone steps. "What if my father changes his mind? What if he decides to come get me in Richmond afterwards?" The teacher held my hands in hers. "Virginia, remember what you wrote in your essay? About the girl who found wings in words? Now it's time to use those wings. As for your father—" She hesitated, choosing her words. "Men like him don't publicly admit certain things. The moment you are under the official protection of a government institution in another city, he will prefer to maintain appearances rather than try to get you back." There was a certainty in her voice that calmed me. She then handed me a small envelope. "It's a gift," she said. "Don't open it now. Save it for when you're on the train." The next morning, before the sun even rose, we began the journey. My father, Arthur, and I took a borrowed wagon to get to the nearest train station, where we would take the train to Richmond. Emily stayed behind. My father didn't want to spend on a ticket for her, and perhaps it was better that way. Our farewell had been the night before, silent and charged with emotion. The journey in the wagon was tense and silent. My father seemed to regret the decision, ruminating on his thoughts. Arthur occasionally looked at me, a mixture of anger and confusion on his face. I kept my eyes fixed on the road ahead, counting each yard that took me away from that house, feeling the weight of the diary and the teacher's envelope hidden under my clothes. We arrived at the station when the sun was beginning to tinge the horizon pink and orange. The train was already on the platform, a huge metal serpent that would take me far away. The sight of it made my heart race, half with fear, half with hope. At the platform, my father bought the tickets, only two, for him and for me. Arthur would stay in Coleridge. Someone has to take care of the house and your mother, he said, but I knew the real reason was economic. Each ticket represented money he didn't want to spend. While we waited for boarding, a man in a suit approached, carrying a camera. "Are you the Brooks, the family of the award-winning student?" My father immediately straightened his posture, adjusted his worn hat. "Yes, we are. I am the father, Conrad Brooks." The man introduced himself as a reporter from the Coleridge newspaper. "May I take a picture? The newspaper is doing a story about the award. It's a pride for our town." My father puffed out his chest, putting his arm around my shoulders in a gesture of false paternal affection. Of course. My daughter has always been very studious, takes after her father." As the reporter adjusted the camera, I realized what Teacher Delilah had done. That newspaper story, that photo, were more than publicity for the contest. They were protection for me. My father was now publicly linked to my award, to my going to Richmond. It would be much harder for him to try to come get me later or explain my sudden disappearance. The flash went off, capturing forever that scene. Me and my father on the platform, about to board a train that would change our lives in ways he couldn't imagine. The train whistle sounded, announcing boarding. My heart was beating so hard I thought everyone around could hear it. Arthur said goodbye dryly, avoiding my gaze. There was a strange moment when he shook my hand. I thought I felt a slight tremor, as if something inside him was breaking. But perhaps it was just my imagination, wanting to see humanity where there was none. We boarded the train, my father and I, settling into hard wooden seats. The carriage was almost empty at that hour of the morning. When the train began to move, I looked out the window to see Coleridge moving away, the small wooden houses getting smaller and smaller, the spire of St. Anthony's Church disappearing on the horizon. The journey would last several hours. My father, after a time observing the landscape, fell asleep, his head bobbing with the movement of the train. It was then that I finally opened the envelope that Teacher Delilah had given me. Inside was money. Not much, but enough for a few weeks, and a note. "Virginia, this is a small aid for your first days. My sister Margaret will be waiting at the Richmond station, near the main exit. She has gray hair tied in a bun and will wear a blue scarf around her neck so you can recognize her. After the award ceremony, my sister will tell your father that the school has requested that you stay for a special orientation. He will probably be relieved not to have to host you or spend more money, and will return alone. Margaret will take care of you until classes begin. The school has already been informed about your special situation, without details, just that you should not return home for the holidays. The principal, Sister Mary, is a trustworthy woman and will ensure your safety. Always remember, your words are your wings. Use them to fly high and free. With affection, Delilah." I carefully folded the note, hiding it again with the money. I looked at my sleeping father, and for the first time, I felt no fear, just a quiet certainty that this would be the last time I would travel with him, the last time I would be under his power. We arrived in Richmond in the middle of the afternoon. The city immediately impressed me, so big, so noisy, so full of people and tall buildings. My father also seemed disoriented, looking around suspiciously as we left the station. It was then that I spotted a lady with gray hair tied in a bun, wearing a blue scarf around her neck. Our eyes met, and she gave a small nod. "Margaret, Teacher Delilah's sister." "You must be the Brooks," she said, approaching with a gentle smile. "I'm Margaret Taylor, sister of Teacher Delilah. She asked me to receive you and accompany you to the Department of Education." My father, always suspicious, examined her from top to bottom. "And how will we get there?" "I have an automobile," she replied calmly. "Please, come with me." We followed Margaret to a small car parked near the station. My father hesitated. He had never ridden in an automobile before, but his pride didn't allow him to show fear. We entered the vehicle, me in the back seat, my father in the front, next to Margaret. As we traveled through the streets of Richmond, I observed everything with fascination. The buildings, the stores, the well-dressed people walking hurriedly. It was a completely different world from Coleridge, a world where I could lose myself and start over. The ceremony at the Department of Education was more formal than I could have imagined. A hall with chairs arranged in rows, authorities seated at the front, flags of the United States and Virginia decorating the environment. My name was called, and I had to walk to the improvised stage to receive a framed certificate and shake hands with men in suits who congratulated me. I saw my father in the audience, uncomfortable in his simple attire, but visibly proud when people around congratulated him. That vanity would be my ally. After the ceremony, Margaret approached us with a serious expression. "Mr. Brooks, I need to inform you that the school has requested that Virginia stay tonight for a special orientation tomorrow morning. Preparations for the start of classes, you understand? The school will provide lodging for her." My father frowned. "And where will I stay? I don't have money for a hotel." "Oh, that won't be necessary," Margaret responded promptly. "You can return to Coleridge today. There's a train at 6 in the evening. Virginia will be well cared for, and the school already has all the necessary authorizations included in the documents that you signed." I saw relief pass over his face. The prospect of returning home soon, without the inconvenience of having to find and pay for lodging, was tempting. Besides, the documents mentioned by Margaret had been signed by him without reading in the rush to appear a responsible father in front of teacher Delilah. "Well, if that's the case," he said, scratching his unshaven beard. Then he turned to me, not really knowing how to say goodbye. We weren't a family of hugs or words of affection. "Behave yourself," was all he said in a tone that mixed order and embarrassment. "And don't forget where you came from." "I won't forget, Dad," I replied. And it was true. I would never forget where I came from, what I had survived, who I had left behind. He nodded, awkwardly, and then left with Margaret, who offered to take him back to the station. I stood there, standing in the courtyard of the Department of Education, holding my certificate and my small bundle of clothes, feeling an indescribable mixture of emotions, relief, fear, hope, and a strange feeling of emptiness that I hadn't expected. An hour later, Margaret returned, alone. "He boarded the train," she said, and I felt my shoulders relax, as if an enormous weight had been removed from them. "Let's go to my house now. You are safe." Safe, a word I barely knew, an almost abstract concept for me until that moment. I entered Margaret's automobile again, leaving behind not just the Department of Education, but an entire life of fear and abuse. Margaret's house was in a quiet neighborhood, away from downtown. It was small but cozy, with books piled everywhere. She was a teacher, like her sister. A simple room awaited me, with a real bed, not a mattress on the floor. A luxury I had never experienced. "You'll stay here until classes begin in 2 weeks," she explained, showing me the house. "Then you'll go to the boarding school. I've already talked to Sister Mary, the principal. She knows that your situation is delicate." "She knows everything?" I asked fearfully. Margaret shook her head. "Not the details. Just that you cannot return home for the holidays. She's a sensitive woman. She'll understand without you needing to explain." That first night away from Coleridge, I cried silently in the borrowed room. They weren't tears of sadness, but of relief, of liberation. It was as if each tear took with it a bit of the weight I had carried for so long. In the 2 weeks I spent with Margaret, I began to get used to the idea of freedom. She took me to see Richmond, gave me some books, taught me simple things like using a public telephone or taking a bus, basic knowledge that I had never had the opportunity to learn. One afternoon, she took me to a uniform store, where I tried on the Sacred Heart School uniform, a navy blue pleated skirt, white shirt, knee-high socks. When I saw myself in the mirror, dressed like a real student, I almost didn't recognize the girl who looked back at me, a girl with a future. On the day I moved to the boarding school, Margaret accompanied me to the imposing gates of the school. It was an old building, with imposing architecture, with a well-tended garden at the entrance. Nuns in dark blue habits circulated through the corridors, guiding the new students. Sister Mary, a tall, thin woman, with surprisingly gentle eyes behind thick-rimmed glasses, received me in her office. Margaret said goodbye with a hug, promising to visit me regularly. "Miss Brooks," said Sister Mary when we were alone, "your teacher in Coleridge spoke very highly of you, said you have a special gift with words." "Thank you, sister," I replied timidly. She observed me for a moment, as if she could see beyond my fragile appearance, beyond the new uniform and carefully combed hair. "In this school," she finally said, "we value not only the intellect, but also character. And we believe that each person has their own journey, their own challenges to overcome." She paused, adjusting her glasses. "I don't know what you left behind in Coleridge, but here you can build something new, a future made by your own hands." At that moment I understood that, somehow, she knew. Not the details, but enough to understand that I was running away, starting over. And she was offering me not just education, but a refuge. "Thank you, sister," I repeated, my voice choked with emotion. My first days at the boarding school were of adaptation. Sharing a room with 3 other girls, following rigid schedules, participating in daily masses, absorbing subjects I had never studied before. But I was determined to take advantage of every moment, every opportunity. I soon discovered that my talent with words really set me apart. In Portuguese and literature classes, my essays caught the teacher's attention. Sister Ruth, who taught literature, even read one of my texts aloud to the class, something that left me both proud and embarrassed. The other girls found me too quiet, too serious for my age. They didn't understand why I studied with such intensity, why I spent hours in the library while they took advantage of free time to talk about boys or fashion. They didn't know that each page read, each knowledge acquired, was for me not just learning, but a way to rebuild myself, to move further and further away from the frightened girl from Coleridge. I maintained contact with Teacher Delilah through letters. She told me the news from Coleridge, how my father was boasting about having a daughter studying in the capital, how the Morgans had finally given up and found another girl for their son Buford. She rarely mentioned Emily, and when she did, it was with care, as if she knew it was a painful subject for me. In one of her letters, almost a year after my departure, she finally brought more detailed news about my mother. "Your mother is thinner, quieter, but there is a new dignity in her. When your father boasts around town about you, she just smiles, a smile that seems to hold a secret. I think she finds strength in the fact that you escaped, that you are building a different life. It's as if your freedom was, somehow, also hers." I cried reading these words, imagining Emily in her silent existence, finding small comforts in the fact that I had achieved what she never could. In the years that followed, I immersed myself in studies with a dedication that impressed even the most demanding nuns. My goal was clear. I would never again depend on anyone, never again be as vulnerable as I had been. Knowledge and education would be my weapons, my shield, my freedom. When the first school holidays came, as agreed, I didn't return to Coleridge. I stayed at the boarding school with a few other students who, for various reasons, also couldn't or didn't want to go home. Sister Mary assigned me special tasks in the library, allowing me to continue learning even during the break. It was during these holidays that I met Sister Margaret, an elderly nun who rarely left her quarters due to fragile health. She had been a literature teacher for decades and had a private collection of books that she allowed me to explore. It was she who introduced me to the work of Emily Dickinson, of Louisa May Alcott, of Virginia Woolf, women who used words to create worlds, to express deep truths. "Words are seeds," Sister Margaret told me one afternoon as we discussed a book. "Planted in the heart and mind, they grow, bloom, bear fruit. The words you write today may feed someone tomorrow." That phrase stayed with me, echoing in the following years. I began to dream not only of my own freedom, but of the possibility of using my words to help other girls, other women trapped in their own invisible cages. At 17, when I completed the course at Sacred Heart School, I was no longer the frightened girl who had arrived from Coleridge. I had become a confident, articulate, determined young woman. Thanks to my academic excellence, I won another scholarship, this time to study literature at the University of Virginia. University life opened even more horizons for me. I met people from different places, with different stories, different dreams. I learned that my experience, as painful as it had been, wasn't unique. Many women carried similar scars. Many had stories of abuse hidden under polite smiles. It was at university that I began to write seriously. Not just academic essays, but short stories, poems, chronicles, texts that spoke in a veiled way about oppression, about silencing, about liberation. Texts that touched other people, that provoked reflections, that built bridges between my experience and that of those who read. And it was through these texts that I found not only my voice, but also my purpose, to use words to illuminate the dark corners where abuse hid, to give voice to those who had been silenced, to show ways out for those who felt trapped. The girl who had once been treated as merchandise transformed into a woman who used her words to change the world, one word, one story, one life at a time. Today, at 73, I live peacefully here in Asheville, North Carolina, where I found my little corner of peace. I came to this small town almost 20 years ago, after retiring as a university professor in Portland, where I taught American literature for more than 3 decades. My journey after university in Richmond took me down various paths. I worked as a teacher in public schools, then secured a position at the University of Oregon. It was there that I met Edward, a history professor who became my companion for 35 years, until his passing 5 years ago. We didn't have biological children, a choice of mine, a result of the scars from the past. But we adopted Martin, now 45, who gave us 2 wonderful grandchildren, Emily and Robert. My craft room, where I create my miniatures of typical American houses in bottles, is my refuge. I began this curious hobby after meeting Mr. Norman, a gentleman who frequented the library where I worked in Portland. He taught me to fold the small pieces of balsa wood, to use fine tweezers, and to have infinite patience to build these miniaturized worlds. Each bottle tells a story. I have one with a replica of the house where I was born in Coleridge, another with Sacred Heart School, another with the first school where I taught. They are pieces of my life, preserved as small personal museums. I have a peaceful routine. I wake up early, have my coffee listening to the radio, then dedicate myself to my miniatures for a few hours. In the afternoons, I receive visits, friends from church, former students who stop by for coffee, my son Martin with the grandchildren when they can come from Portland. Sometimes, I give lectures at the local school about literature or creative writing workshops for young people. I managed to bring my mother, Emily, to live with me when I established myself in Portland. She lived with us for almost 10 years, finally knowing a little peace before passing away. My father and Arthur I never saw again. I learned by letter from teacher Delilah that my father died in an accident at the mine years after I left Coleridge, and Arthur moved to Montana. I published several books over the years, short stories, chronicles, and 2 novels. The best known, Girl in a Glass Cage, won National Literature Awards. In it, I tell in fictionalized form the story of a girl who escapes abuse through words. Many readers write to me saying they identified with it, that they found courage in my pages. That is, perhaps, my greatest joy today, knowing that the words that once saved me now help other people find their own liberation. The seeds that Sister Margaret spoke of that I planted bore fruit that feeds hearts hungry for hope. Looking back at the frightened girl I was, I feel an immense tenderness. I wish I could go back in time and tell her, "You will succeed. You will build a beautiful life. You will know true love. You will use your pain to help other people. Your words will be wings, not just for you, but for many other girls trapped in their own cages." This is the life I built, brick by brick, word by word. A life that, despite the scars of the past, or perhaps because of them, became a story of hope. My dear friends watching me now, if you are going through something similar to what I experienced, or know someone in that situation, I want to say some important things. First, know that abuse is never the victim's fault. Never. What they do to you does not define who you are or who you can become. The scars we carry may hurt, but they can also make us stronger, more compassionate, more determined to change the world. I learned that age doesn't define our strength, but rather our ability to start anew each day. My wrinkles are maps of survival. Each one tells a story of pain overcome. Life taught me that even in the deepest darkness, our inner light never goes out. I never allowed my dignity to be stolen, even when they tried to take everything from me. I discovered that we are stronger than we imagine, especially when we think we can't take it anymore. Time doesn't heal all wounds, but it teaches us to live with them and still smile. My story isn't about what they did to me, but about how I chose to respond. I learned that true strength isn't in never falling, but in getting up every time. Seek help. Today, there are organizations in every country dedicated to protecting victims of abuse. There are people willing to listen, to believe, to extend a hand. No matter where you are, there are ways to get out of abusive situations. And remember, silence protects the abuser, never the victim. Education was my salvation, but each person finds their own path. For some, it may be art, music, spirituality, working with other people. The important thing is to believe that there is a path, that there is a way out, that there exists a future beyond abuse. And now, I want to make a special request for you. If this story touched your heart, please, right now, click on the subscribe button and activate the bell. Why? Because each subscription helps this message reach other people who may be suffering in silence at this very moment. Share this video with someone you think needs to hear this message. You never know who is fighting in silence, who is seeking a spark of hope to find courage. Your share could be the turning point in someone's life, and in the comments, leave the word love so I know you watched until the end. This word that means so much to me that I've sought throughout my entire life. Do this now. Don't wait even one more minute. Together, we can create a chain of support and hope for those who are still trapped in their own cage. Always remember, our stories, no matter how painful they may be, do not define our future. They are just chapters in a book that we continue to write every day, with our own words, our own choices, our own courage. Thank you for watching this episode of Grandparents' Tales. If you enjoyed my story, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories from people who've lived long enough to gain some wisdom worth sharing. Until next time, this is Virginia Brooks, sending you love from my little corner in Asheville.